What advice do you have for us, that is today's law students, as our nation's next generation of lawyers?
Ooh. That is a very broad one. Pass all your exams, get out of law school, pass the bar, and then I would say that, whatever it is that you decide that you want to do, if you want to work in a big firm, a big corporation, that's fine. If you want to make huge amounts of money, that is a great thing. That's a wonderful thing. But always think of yourselves in some ways as a public interest lawyer, and find a way to dedicate at least a portion of your time giving back. You all are the best and the brightest, and you have the benefit of a great education at this wonderful law school. I think you have, therefore, a responsibility to find ways in which, consistent with the traditions of this school, you try to make America better, make America live up to its founding ideals. We are in a fundamentally different place than we were in 1963, as I talked about in my remarks, but there's still much injustice in this country. There's still wrongs that need to be righted, and you are the people who can lead that effort. And so I would urge you all to find ways in which, as I said, you use the education that you will receive, the talents that you obviously have, to work on those issues. You will find it not an easy thing to do. You will have, your regular job, perhaps, if you're not working in the public interest sphere. But although it will be difficult, time-consuming, you will find it, I think, ultimately rewarding, and the kind of thing that you look back on 5, 10, 15 years, and when you get to be my age and looking back on a much longer period of time, as something that was worthwhile and indeed consistent with why you probably came to law school in the first place.
In your experience, my goodness.
Pass those exams.
Anything else?
Study hard.
In your experience, what's the most significant role that DOJ plays in administering the laws of the country, and how would you say that role has changed over time, if at all?
I'm not sure that it's changed over time. Our most significant role is to enforce the law in an apolitical way, and to the extent possible to be seen as doing it in an apolitical way, in a nonpartisan way. We have immense power in the Justice Department to enforce the criminal law, our civil laws. And as I was talking to Jerry's people in Jerry's office today, we have, with that power, a great responsibility to make sure that we are using that power in appropriate ways. It is, whenever the Justice Department forgets that really kind of central tenet, the department loses its way and finds itself in choppy waters. And I think one of the things I think we've done is to do things in that apolitical, nonpartisan way. I would hope that that would be the thing that we will be remembered for. But I think it's probably the most important thing that any Justice Department can do. But also to have a sense that, our mission is not, it's bigger than simply enforcing the law. There's kind of a sphere, an undefined sphere, I think, about the department's responsibilities. And that is to live up to the values of our nation, our founding values, and to come up with ways in which we're always trying to advance that cause. And it's not simply looking at Title 18 of the Criminal Code and figuring out what statutes we're going to enforce. We have to think larger thoughts. I mean, how do we make, as I was talking to the law students before, how do we in the department make this nation better? Are there innovative things that we can be doing? I think back to John Siegenthaler in the Kennedy administration, the many things that were done there. In some ways, that is thought of as the golden age of the Justice Department, and I think that spirit and that sense of mission is something that hopefully will imbue all future generations who serve in the Justice Department.
What would you identify as your biggest accomplishment and your biggest disappointment as we approach the end of President Obama's first term?
All righty then. Well, in accomplishment, I think one of the things, I grew up in the Justice Department. I came there in 1976, served 12 years in the public integrity section, have come back on a number of other occasions. I am who I am as a lawyer as a result of my work in the department, my interaction with great lawyers in the department. And I would hope that one of the things that I've done, that we have done in the department, is to revitalize a Justice Department that, frankly, I think had some issues before I got there. And a department that I think had lost its way and did things in a way that's inconsistent with the department that I have always loved. I served under Republican as well as Democratic attorneys general, and there's always been in the department a sense that there's a way in which we do things. And I think, as I said, that the department, for at least a little while, lost its way. And my hope is that we have revitalized, brought back to the department that sense of tradition. So I think that would be an accomplishment. In terms of disappointment, you know, one of the things I guess that I think we have missed in Washington is that this notion of bipartisanship, notion that however passionate our views as Republicans and Democrats, that at the end of the day we can not put them aside, but use them to forge a basis for agreements, compromise. You know, there seems to be a notion that feelings and beliefs are somehow inconsistent with compromise, and that's not the case. I talked about Mr. Siegenthaler a lot, but I mean in 1963, in the 60s, the passions were just as high, and yet, you know, landmark legislation was passed in the 60s that affects us, you know, to this day. The Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act, all kinds of wonderful legislation. I don't think we've found our way to do that. The hyper-partisanship that you see in Washington, D.C. now, I think it's gotten in the way of the work that government is supposed to do, and the American people, I think, as a result, have suffered.
What would you say is the obligation of the Department of Justice to defend a law that it believes is unconstitutional?
It is the tradition of the department to defend all statutes that Congress passes. You can imagine that you don't want to have a Justice Department that comes in and is of a different party than the party of a president or a Senate House that passed the statute, a different party to come in and say, well, we're not going to defend that statute. It is the long-standing tradition of the department to defend all statutes that, that Congress passes, whether you agree with them or not. However, when you come to a situation where you think that a statute is unconstitutional, I think it is our obligation as lawyers, as officers of the court, not to defend that statute, to be very clear as to why you're not defending that statute. That happens very rarely, but it does happen. Has happened in our administration, has happened in the previous administration and other administrations before. I guess it happened most significantly in this administration with our decision not ultimately to defend the Defense of Marriage Act, where we found in the Second Circuit a lack of a clear precedent, looked at the statute, applied, looked at the legislative history, looked at the history that gay and lesbian citizens have had to face and to endure in our nation's history, and ultimately decided that the statute was unconstitutional and indicated to the court in as clear a way as we could that we would not defend the constitutionality of the statute. But that is really the exception as opposed to the rule, which is that we defend all statutes that Congress passes.
What is the department doing with regard to significant changes in state election laws recently enacted by a number of states, such as voter ID requirements?
Yeah, I mean, I find at least in two instances, in the cases that we have opposed so far, South Carolina and Texas, solutions proposed by those legislatures, by the governors of those states, solutions for problems that do not exist. In the filings that we got from South Carolina and from Texas, there was no statistical evidence, no statistical proof that in-person vote fraud was an issue, a problem that would require the, I think in some ways, draconian measures that were passed, that is the use of these photo IDs in order to vote. When one considers that we're talking about a fundamental right, maybe the most fundamental right, and the thing that distinguishes the United States from maybe, you know, all other countries, it's the thing that we hold ourselves out as really standing for, this notion of participatory democracy. The fact that you would pass these statutes that don't deal with a problem that exists, but have the collateral impact of disenfranchising, hundreds of thousands of people, perhaps in Texas, tens of thousands, perhaps in South Carolina. When we find those statutes, will oppose them under the powers that we have under the Voting Rights Act, under either Section 5 or Section 2. But that does not mean that every change in a voting law will be something that we will say is inappropriate and move to strike down. We look at these on a case-by-case basis, but we will not hesitate where we find something, as I said, that's inconsistent with the Voting Rights Act, and beyond that, inconsistent with who we say we are as Americans, to strike it down. Participatory democracy and participation in elections is kind of the lifeblood of our democracy. And if you look at the arc of American history, it's always been to be more inclusive. African Americans, former slaves, were given the right to vote. Women, younger people, way back when, non-property owners. We've always tried to come up with ways in which we have more people voting. And this attempt for, at least in 2 instances, to kind of cut back on that is in many ways inconsistent with our history and inconsistent with who we say we are and who we want to be as Americans.
What does the future hold for criminal trials of individuals charged with terrorism?
Interesting. Yeah. This is a very good law school. One of the easy questions coming. Okay? It's interesting. There is a tension between what we want to do in the executive branch with regard to the trials of terrorists and what many in the legislative branch want to do, many in Congress want to do. I have said, and the proof is painfully obvious, it seems to me, that our Article III courts have the capacity to handle terrorist trials. We have done it over the years in this administration, the prior administration, where hundreds of people have been tried, convicted. There's never been an attack on a courtroom or in a district where a trial was being held. We have been able to protect secret information where that was needed. The Article III courts are an effective way in which we can deal with this terrorist threat. Doesn't mean, on the other hand, that we shouldn't use military commissions. On the day that I announced that the Khalid Sheikh Mohammed trial should occur in New York City, and I still think that was the right decision, I also announced that 4 or 5 other cases were going to be tried in military commissions, which I think under their reformed basis provide adequate due process and are consistent with our American sense of fairness. There are those in Congress, however, who do not share that view and have tried to impose on the administration certain requirements or take away from us certain options that I think we need to have if we want to be effective in this fight against terrorism. And again, I think it comes down to almost faith in our system, faith in our values. We always hold out our court system as the crown jewel of our democracy, and indeed it is. If you truly believe that, and if you've seen how effective it is, my question for my colleagues in the legislative branch is, why would you take that tool away from us and put greater faith in a system that I think, though better than it was, is still largely untested? So ultimately, I think there's going to be a battle between the legislative branch and the executive branch over that very issue. We just announced some regulations that the president had to promulgate, and we have, I think, done appropriately what the sponsors of the legislation indicated the purpose of the legislation was, and we acted in a way that was consistent with the president's signing statement, where we brought to the executive branch and to the Attorney General in particular the right to decide where a particular terrorist might be tried.
If you'll indulge me, I'm going to go off script for my final question. Okay. What school located in Nashville, Tennessee, would you predict is going to win the NCAA men's and women's basketball championship?
Well, that's easy. Vanderbilt.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you so much. I think they want you to this way.